Well, folks, this is According to Callus, and it is Saturday. I had life come upon me, and I was tied up with other priorities, if you will, on Thursday. And Friday was an impromptu party by my daughter. So I'm jumping in on Saturday to make up for a lost episode. There'll be no video this time because I just got in from working outside, and I am a mess. So I feel like rehashing constantly what's been going down in Austin is getting old. The level of disappointment, distrust, and disgust is continuing to grow by the grassroots and the general public. I don't know what else more I need to say about that other than even if these guys should manage to get passing grades via the legislative priorities, I gotta imagine there's going to be enough angst that people are going to just feel the need to primary the entire slate in Collin County, which I don't know if that's absolutely necessary, but if you're listening and you're an elected official from Collin County, that is your fair warning. Regardless of what I think and say, that may just come in anyways because you guys just have not been very proactive in getting stuff done. I don't know how other I could put it that makes sense. So now I need to abruptly shift gears. I'm going to make this a little bit of a potpourri on topics here. I have a friend of mine, maybe good acquaintance might be a more accurate term. He has an education in the background that's different than I. He also doesn't look like me. So I'm purposely trying to be a little vague because I don't wish to out the guy because he may not want to be associated with me. But we've gone back and forth a bit about CRT. And, some of you may recall I made a video last year asking the question, do Black Lives Matter? It was a rhetorical question, of course, because of course they do. That's a stupid question. Why would you even have to ask that? And I understand that there's a certain segment of the society that maybe feels like that's not the case, or maybe wants to be reassured that that is the case. And I completely get that. I do. Just philosophically speaking, I don't relate to that well because I don't really have that issue by just the mere birth of being a white dude, right? So, but I can wrap my head around why somebody might need that reassurance or that encouragement. I got to say to the general public that went way off the rails. If you're worried about that now, if you're, marching around screaming that now, I'm really? Come on. It's almost like a siren call. Maybe that's the dog whistle, right? They want to see a racist white guy under every box and around every corner, behind every tree. The reality is it's really not the case. Now, having spoken to another gentleman this last couple nights, I got to say, when he was explaining what happened to him in several counties east of Collin County in Texas, he was far more generous about his description than somebody else might have been. I think largely he referenced the idea that this mostly motivated by the Good Old Boys Network rather than just plain racist attitude. I gotta say, I don't know how I'd react if I were in his shoes, but I gotta give it to the guy. He had a lot of restraint, and I guess the old school word would be class when describing what had happened. Quite frankly, to me, that's embarrassing. I mean, at one point I asked, is it, 1967, 1968? I mean, I would expect that then. I wouldn't necessarily have thought that was great. And sure, it's easy to say 2021 that, I would have been against that. But 1968, you really don't know. You weren't there. You didn't experience it. People didn't really know any better. being a Reformed Yankee, my background's a little different, but I got to say, that was kind of surprising to me. Now, I would like to believe, I would like to think that it was more based upon that they were exercising their good old boys network and they had their own people and they had their own reasons other than they just didn't want to listen to a guy that didn't look like them. That's extremely disappointing and frustrating. I mean, here I am in Collin County. It's 2021, and I really don't see the problems that I keep hearing about on the media. Yet when I hear this story, I can't help but think to myself, is that our reality even in Texas in this day? That it's based upon what the guy looks like rather than his ideas. It's based upon who his parents were rather than what he's promoting or she's promoting, just in case you think I'm now being sexist. Motivations and ideas matter, but actions realistically matter more because that's what's actually happening. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I would like to say that I have my own response already crafted. I might respond with some Navy talk that I will not utilize in this podcast. But I got to say, at the end of the day, it was kind of mind-blowing. And right now, if my good acquaintance is listening, he's probably, I told you, man. Okay, fine. I'll grant you there's probably some parts of this country that still think it's 1968. But I would also say that the vast majority of the general public wants no part of that. In fact, I would go so far as to say is pretty much all the governmental organizations and the corporate organizations have almost completely flipped that entire scenario on its side and then kicked it over and are doing the exact reverse. Now, when I was a kid in kindergarten, I was, taught, two wrongs don't make a right, and just because Johnny hits you doesn't mean you get to hit Johnny back, and all that kind of thing. So, going off of the well-known fact that people that didn't look like me and didn't sound like me were treated poorly for being generous a couple hundred years, and being less than fairly treated for, I guess, probably a good 20 years before I was born till probably less than 20 years ago. I think that's probably a fair estimation. That's not saying everything's been perfect since 2000. Please, I'm not selling that. I'm just saying that the reality that I've experienced and that I've observed in my experiences don't necessarily equate and jive with what I've observed. I mean, just taking in media, interactions that you see that you're not directly involved in, stories that you hear, they've been slightly different than what I've personally experienced. So I'm smart enough to know that even if I have a fairly large scope of interaction, that does not equate for the reality of the world around me. Hence, what apparently happened this last year or the last several months in East Texas. So, the question is what do we do about it, right? CRT, is my understanding, basically just looks to assess what is the source or what is the cause of some of these problems, real or imagined, most of them being real, I would imagine. But so if we accept that it's a tool, you first have to ask, what is the purpose of this tool? Is this tool a diagnostic tool that helps us determine what is the correct steps or the correct process or the correct action to have a solution? Or is this CRT actually just exist as a tool to put blame upon others and to create strife and to create blame and reasserting blame and bring about guilt, and the answer is just give me something. I don't know. I can't answer that. Honestly, I just don't want to spend the time looking into it because even though I don't necessarily believe in genetic fallacies, when I find out and what I hear about the people that promote this and push it forward, I don't think that they have good intentions in the slightest. So why would I want to give them a free pass on this tool, which is, by my understanding, tainted at the very least, and slanted to give them the answers that they already want? I mean, if everything's already my fault as being a white guy, then we don't really even need to talk about it. First of all, I'm not going to agree because I wasn't around 100 years ago. I wasn't around 200 years ago. I had no decision or choice in the matter. And while my life might be better in certain areas because of who my parents were, I would make the exact response back that my life is actually more challenging or more difficult in other areas because of that. So there is no such thing as true equality. There is no such thing as absolute equality of opportunity, and there's certainly never going to be an equality of outcome. So we need just to put that to bed, put it to rest right now, and accept some people are going to have a tougher time than others. Could they be disproportionately represented by one particular group or another? Yes, absolutely. Let's not even go there. Let's just accept that's the way it is. We want a fairer society. We want a society that does not put up roadblocks and does not cause problems. But then when you pause and you consider, where did most of these problems and most of these issues originate? Well, you think to yourself, who did that? I'll tell you. It was almost always government. Now, sometimes it was government on behest of businesses. Sometimes it was government on behest of unions. Sometimes it was government on behest of the ruling oligarchy, if you will, that has always existed and will always exist. My responses would include, well, let's look at drug laws. Look at the origin of the drug laws and look how they have been applied. Then look at gun control laws. Look at the origin of gun control laws and look at how they've been applied in most cases. Sometimes they've been in reverse, but that's a separate story. Then let's look at the purpose of public education, or what I would refer to as government education. What was the origins and purpose of it? Then let's go back and look at the creation of public or subsidized housing. What was the purpose of it? Not what were you told. Now, don't look at the sales pitch that we were given. Look at the motivations of the people that came up with the idea. What were the origins of it? What were they really trying to accomplish? Not what we were told. And you may even want to look into welfare laws, entitlements. Where did that come about? Why did it come about? And what was the motivation of the people that made it happen? And now I'm not talking about the do-gooders that actually think it was going to make a positive difference. I'm talking about the people that signed off on it and actually pushed it through. What was their motivations? What were the results? Okay, so those are just a few examples. All of those predate my birth. All those came about by different groups or similar groups, but they all had specific purposes. And they all had targeted audiences, if you will. Or if you want to be really fun about this, look into the origin of Planned Parenthood. Look into what the beliefs were of their founders. Eugenics, anyone? Yes. So while we may have a legitimate situation here that should be addressed and should be corrected, it's kind of irrelevant at this point who the blame is on if you're just going to say it's white men. If you're not going to acknowledge that there were different things going on there, and was there a racial or a cultural or a other motivation involved? Yeah, ethnic, right? That's the other thing that gets left out of it. A lot of this has to do with ethnicity disparities that just fed over into the racial disparity, right? Public education was started long before it became a racial thing. It was an ethnic thing. But you don't have to believe me. Go look it up. It's not that hard to find. There's plenty of information on this. So I ask you, great, you have this nice tool that likes to assess blame. Now that you've assessed the blame, which strangely enough almost always ends up to be my people's fault, the real question is what are we going to do about it? How do you fix it? How do we improve this? Where do we go from here? And then I'm always told there's really not an answer for that. That's not the purpose of it. That's not what we're trying to do. Okay, so if you're not actually trying to fix the problem, you're not interested in probable solutions, which in my world would most likely mean less government interference, less government intervention, less government dictating to other people how they should treat other people. But we'll just set that aside for a minute. What is the purpose then? What are you trying to accomplish? What do you hope to get out of that? Because I can tell you, eventually, people that look like me and sound like me are going to get awfully tired of being told that we are the source of all of society's ills and that the Western civilization and Western culture is a pox on the entire world. Well, I will tell you that if you go to China and you don't speak Chinese and you don't look Chinese, I'm fairly certain they're not going to be real thrilled with you. Unless, of course, you've got lots of money, because money seems to trump everything. So if you go basically to any country in Africa that is not already Arab dominated, or in today's day and age, maybe Chinese dominated, or maybe even, Idi Amin chased out all the Indians that were in his country. So I'm not sure that's an issue. But if you're not Black African, they really don't have any love for you. And I guess if you're in Rhodesia / Zimbabwe or parts of South Africa, I guess it kind of brought some of that on you. But the reality is, if you're going to be completely objective, a lot of Africans were far better off under the results of apartheid than what they are now. Yes, I know that's a terrible thing. We're going to have to expel him. He's not allowed to talk anymore. I'm just saying, if you look at the whole big picture, do I defend apartheid? No. Do I think it was the best system possible? No. But even as bad as it was, more people were better off back then than they are now. I don't know why that is. I haven't looked into it. Can't answer. I've just seen some of the statistics and some of the studies that have come out basically saying, well, we know Zimbabwe is a mess. Let's see what's happened in South Africa since... maybe we should use CRT to determine what's at fault there. I would be curious. Perhaps we could use CRT in India or China to see how that works there. I don't know. I think it might be an interesting thing, right? Instead of just blaming the convenient target for all that is wrong with the world, Western civilization, Western culture, and quite frankly, just white guys, let's consider that maybe there's other countries where things are actually worse than it is here now. Maybe there are other things that are worse that maybe we should put as a higher priority. I don't know. I'm just purely speculating. Next topic. So, kind of sort of related is the idea that they may have ended chattel slavery, if you will, in the United States. But did they really? Consider the following. I'm going to play an excerpt from Tom Woods' show where he is replaying a talk that he gave, I think he said about 10 years ago, He was invited to speak at a Republican convention, just a couple of minutes long. And I think the story is actually Robert Nozick's, and he is relating it. So I'm going to play his recording rather than try and do justice to it. And I will jump right back. So if the sound's messed up, it's because I'm playing this on my iPhone through my microphone here. And I'm just going to have to be quiet. Here it comes.
Ultimately, it's about right and wrong. And here I want to close, but it's a long close, so I'm building up to something. Okay? I want to close with a little story from Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick, the late Robert Nozick, was a Harvard philosopher who wrote a book in 1974, won a bunch of awards, called Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And I want to read to you, these are going to be my words, but they're his ideas. I want to read to you his Tale of the Slave. And it goes through 9 stages, but they're very short. The Tale of the Slave runs like this. First, and he invites all of us to consider ourselves as the slave in the story. First stage, you are a slave at the mercy of a brutal master who forces you to work for his purposes and beats you arbitrarily. Second, the master decides to beat you only for breaking the rules and even grants you some free time. Third, you are part of a group of slaves subject to this master. He decides on grounds acceptable to everyone how goods should be allocated among you all. Fourth, the master requires his slaves to work only 3 days per week, granting them the other 4 days off. They can do as they wish during their free time. Fifth, the master now allows the slaves to work wherever they wish. His main caveat is that they must send him 3/7 of their wages, corresponding to the 3 days' worth of work they once had to do on his land every week. In an emergency, he can force them to do his bidding once again, and he retains the power to alter the fraction of their wages to which he lays claim. Sixth, the master grants all 10,000 of his slaves, except you, the right to vote. They can decide among themselves how much of their and your earnings to take and what outlets to fund with the money. They can decide what you are and are not allowed to do. We can suppose, for the sake of argument, that the master irrevocably grants this right to the 10,000 slaves. You now have 10,000 masters or a single 10,000-headed master. Seventh, you are granted the freedom to try to persuade the 10,000 to exercise their vast powers in a particular way. You still do not have the right to vote, but you can try to influence those who do. Eighth, the 10,000 grant you the right to vote, but only to break a tie. You write down your vote, and if a tie should occur, they open it and record it. No tie has ever occurred. Ninth, you are granted the right to vote, but functionally, it simply means, as in the 8th stage, that in case of a tie, which has never occurred, your vote carries the issue. Nozick's question is this: at what stage between 1 and 9 did this become something other than the tale of a slave? Well, that's an interesting unexamined question, because it is an unexamined premise of our society, across the American political spectrum, that society cannot function without a single coercive institution with the power to dispose of the lives and fortunes of over 300 million individuals. While throwing the poor a few scraps in 1,001 open and covert ways, this institution enriches various elites at the expense of the productive population. The more it grows, the worse it gets. More and more sectors of society conclude they too must enrich themselves by means of government-granted privilege. Everyone begins to clamor for subsidies just in order to break even. The industrialists take, the farmers take, the scientists take, the military establishment takes, the social workers take, the education bureaucracy takes, everybody takes. All of this looting under cover of law is what Frederick Bastiat, the great 19th century French economist, memorably called legal plunder. No one considers it legitimate to stick a gun in his neighbor's ribs and take his things. Yet we are taught to believe that a dramatic moral difference separates that kind of open stealing with the indirect kind. In other words, when the government sticks a gun in your neighbor's ribs and hands the proceeds to you. Nozick put it like this: when you tax away from someone the fruits of 5 months of his labor, you are in effect taking away 5 months from him. You are taking away part of his life. Dance around the issue all you like, but this is forced labor by any reasonable definition of the term.
So, there you go. Now you see how everything ties together. Right? The underlying issue, the underlying thing I always come back to, does it do us any good to send representatives to do our bidding if they promptly do whatever they want? Does it do us any good to work and deliver the goods for these people to go and represent us if they're really not representing us? So when you look at something like working and giving up a good chunk of what you've made for whatever reason, what good is it doing you? Now, I am fairly well versed on all the arguments about how we need to have a nice society, a collective good, and all this other stuff. Yeah, that's all well and good. But I ask you, what good has it done? Are we better off? So my friends that use the CRT, they typically come from the left side of the aisle, and I don't necessarily hold that against them, but they really don't offer any solutions that I'm aware of that go beyond give me more or it's your fault, what are you going to do about it? We have been spending an inordinate amount of money, really for close to a century, to give people things that wasn't theirs, that they didn't earn. Whether it was Social Security, whether it was Great Society stuff, whether it's unemployment. Now, you can argue that we need that net, right? We need the safety net. I've often heard it called a hammock. I'm not going to cast aspersions. I've been out of work once or twice in my life. I've taken unemployment when I was out of work, at least once. And it pained me to have to do that. It was so frustrating. And somebody said, well, you've paid in. They've been taking your money. You might as well get some of it back. And I was a little salve on it, but in my heart of hearts, I wanted to be above that. I didn't want to partake in that system. But the reality is, they're still going to take a little piece of what you make. No matter how little you make, they're going to get their cut. Right? They're kind of like the mafia. They just want to wet their beak, right? So, in some ways, I often wonder if the mafia wouldn't be a better government than what we currently have. So, maybe we ended slavery. Maybe we just renamed it. Maybe we took a group of people, dislocated them, relocated them, and then, I guess, tried to reprogram them would be the best way to put it. They didn't like it. It didn't take. Although, almost universally, they don't want to go back from where they came from. Yet, if America is so awful, so terrible, why does everybody still want to get here? I'd like to believe it was for something more than just the free money you get by getting past the borders. I'd like to believe it's because we have the best medical system in the world and everywhere else is significantly less, and that's not why they're coming. I would really like to believe it's because they have the understanding that there's more liberty here, that they have more freedom here than wherever they came from. Then we have to consider that some of those people coming here have ill intent. Some of them actually want to take down our country. Now, if I'm completely objective and rational about this, I can understand why there would be people that want to do that. Particularly if they're from the Middle East or China. I don't agree with them, but I can understand where they would want to do that. Yet, our leadership seems just complicit or complacent or doesn't comprehend what's at play here. If we have 300 million people, and of those 300 million people, 250 of them are legitimate U.S. citizens, and of those 250 million legitimate U.S. citizens, half are female, and that leaves us 125 legitimate U.S. citizens, and we're going to say half of them are over the age of 18. I'm sure it's higher than that, but we're talking about a fighting age type thing, right? From 18 to 45 or something like that. So maybe that's another half. That's still 62 million people. Or better than, actually. We just rounded up to 65 for argument's sake. So we have 65 million people in this country that have near open access to firearms. And if this stuff continues, they may end up dealing with what could only be loosely classified as a slave revolt. Do you think they don't already know that? Do you think that maybe, just maybe, that's some of the motivations for what we've been going through the last couple of years? The lockdown, lock up, mask on, don't go anywhere with anybody else, don't spend any time with anybody else, shutting down churches, shutting down bars, and if you're going to go, you have to be first cleared, and you can't really travel anywhere, you can't do this, but we're going to leave the borders wide open, And, oh, by the way, now that we're going to let you go, you have to check in, you have to feed in, you have to be eventually chipped, I'm sure. Did you ever consider that maybe the fact that they want to take away firearms, slowly but surely, they just want to limit your access? You know, that reasonable gun control. The fact that they're making it more difficult to buy ammunition, that the fact they're wanting to actually trace individual bullets is all part of something that we just don't quite understand. And I'm not one to subscribe to conspiracy for the sake of conspiracy, but when you look at what's going on around us, do you think that those in power, that oligarchy that always exists, will always exist, doesn't really understand that there's potentially 65 million people with access to how many millions or hundreds of millions of firearms? If they decide to take matters into their own hands, don't you think that might be messy? Don't you think that might be scary to those people? Don't you think that maybe, just maybe, that's their motivation? They just don't want to deal with the slave revolt. Now, we can argue about the definition of slavery. We can argue about this group or that group. But if you just do a little cursory search, if you will, into the history of Rome, they had multiple slave revolts. There was even a movie made out, or more than one movie made out, about a guy named Spartacus. That's for no reason in particular, right? There's nothing going on there. Nothing to see here. He led a slave revolt. In fact, back in the colonial times, that was one of the things that most scared some of the planters. Those oligarchs in the South. They didn't want people to know what had happened down in Haiti. They had their concerns about what was going to happen in Cuba. Oh, you didn't know about that? Yeah, you probably ought to look into what happened in Cuba and how they suppressed that. Or if you prefer, some of the things they did in the Dominican Republic. So you got to ask yourself. In the past, I've talked about or referenced the idea that they're trying to turn us into livestock. That's the real thing. There's no sinister thing going on there. There's no grand conspiracy. It's just, if people are docile and they do their work and they provide, everybody's happy, right? I mean, that's what everybody wants, right? They want the peaceful pasture. I don't know. I prefer a little dangerous liberty. Well, folks, that is the Saturday fill-in episode for Friday. Gone a little over 30 minutes. I have taken the potpourri and tied them together. I hope that you found this useful. I would love to see some responses. Until Monday, I will see you on the other side. This is According to Callus, and I'm out of here.